Hi, my name is Dwayne Gathers, and welcome to CivitasLA, featuring diverse and emerging leaders who make up this dynamic region and are creating community every day and building a better tomorrow. These bi-weekly conversations enable us to hear from, learn from, and be inspired by a new generation of civic entrepreneurs who are forging a path forward in making our region a stronger, more resilient, and connected group of citizens. Our goal is to elevate civic discourse, foster community connections, and promote civic knowledge and engagement across the greater Los Angeles region while elevating diverse and emerging voices in that conversation. As we continue our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month 2022, we've been excited to be joined by a great group of Latino and Latina leaders across our region who contribute so much to creating, building, and serving communities across our region. And while this may be the last episode in this particular series, we certainly don't require any given month to celebrate diverse and inspiring civic leadership. With no prior experience in the sector, but inspired by a desire to revitalize neighborhoods through real estate, today's guest has built an organization with a mission of managing and developing properties that empower the communities they operate in while promoting excellence, and has achieved enormous success operating in and serving diverse communities. Some might call them under-resourced communities across South and Southeast Los Angeles, amongst other locations. So today we are grateful to be joined in studio this afternoon by Arturo Sneider, founding partner and CEO of Primestor Development, Inc., a retail sector leader focused on leasing, property management, development, construction management, rehabilitation, and acquisitions. Arturo, welcome to CivitasLA, or, as I said in my last episode, my Spanish is getting better, bienvenidos a CivitasLA.
Muchas gracias, Dwayne. Pleasure to be here with you.
Outstanding. We appreciate you being here this afternoon. And Arturo, as we say on CivitasLA, we always appreciate if our guests will offer a brief personal introduction to yourself and tell us a little bit about your company.
Thank you, Dwayne. Yeah, so I moved to L.A. in '86 on the heels of the sort of change of politics and environmental sort of environment in Mexico as the business of narcotics started moving into our country. Mm-hmm. And it really changed the dynamics of the country. And I came here, at first I worked in a restaurant, in a kitchen. I was a prep. I was working in the line. And there I sort of became very close friends with the people I worked with. And in that environment, I discovered really an opportunity for trying to influence and impact the way communities were engaged throughout their political and social environment. So we started the company really as an activist organization trying to bring about change in the community, and I think that is who we are today.
Mm-hmm. That's great, and we're going to talk more about that transition from Mexico City to L.A. and your transition from the restaurant business into real estate. But before we get started, we always love the lightning round, because the lightning round is a great opportunity for us to get a glimpse of you and your Los Angeles through some of your favorite things about Los Angeles. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, in CivitasLA, we love food and the role that restaurants play in building community. So give us a favorite restaurant or two.
La Casita Mexicana in Bell.
Okay.
Absolutely my favorite.
Okay.
They have authentic food and great flavor, great personalities there.
Okay.
And I really love, taco places on the street, taco trucks, everything. That's the beauty of L.A. You have the Korean tacos and the Japanese tacos. And so I go to Leo's Tacos quite a bit, Leo's Taco Truck in downtown.
Yeah, we love the food trucks here in L.A. Give us a favorite place to take a sip, whether that's a glass of wine or a cocktail or a cup of coffee or a tea.
Well, I'm a morning one cup of coffee in the morning person.
Okay,
not
impressive.
A lot of time for a sip in the afternoon. So I generally end up walking every morning. I live in Venice Beach, and I walk to there's about 3 coffee shops there, Intelligentsia, Blue Bottle. I walk over there in the mornings and grab a cup of coffee.
Outstanding. Give us a favorite place to take a visitor.
In LA, I love taking people down the boardwalk in Venice because you're so exposed to everything. It's a Star Wars bar scene, everything you've ever imagined. It's wonderful. People love visiting LA because of the ocean and all that, so I think it's a great place.
Absolutely. So we love our outdoor space. Are you a hiker at all? Give us a favorite hike or park.
Yeah, hiking is actually a big part of my life growing up.
Okay.
I'm a high-risk adventure traveler.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I do hike quite a bit. I go in Los Leones, hike, and then Malibu Lake.
Okay. Where's Leones?
Los Leones is over by Palisades. It's
Okay.
a beautiful,
Okay.
pretty steep hike. You get a view of the ocean. It's beautiful.
Not one of these Runyon Canyon social hikes.
No, no
Okay.
Instagram moment.
Right. No Instagram moments there.
Kodak spot.
And as we've moved through this pandemic and people are starting to gather again, we love the return of our community events. Give us a favorite community event or activity.
So we as a firm actually live by community events.
Okay.
And our marketing team has events consistently throughout the year. Always my favorite thing to do is to go to the community events that we organize. The community comes out. We see families there. We have all kinds of activities, job fairs and health fairs. And we celebrate all the diversity of our region with holiday seasons throughout the year.
Okay.
It's always a good reason to celebrate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's great. We love our Civitas LA favorites and love sharing this with our growing and diverse group of listeners, both nationally and internationally and across the region, folks who don't get from the east side over out to Venice. We appreciate that. So I want to go back to your journey to Los Angeles because I found it really fascinating. You said you moved here from Mexico City in '86. And you were in the restaurant business for a while, and then you started this real estate company. But I think in our conversation that we had, you started with a small project in like the Pico Union area. So talk about your journey a little bit more and how you founded this real estate company.
Yeah. So at the time, I didn't really know anything about real estate, and even to this day, I'm learning every day.
Okay.
I think that when I started going to these communities and really identifying with them because they have the best food and the best locations to have, I realized that there was a disconnect between where I was working in the West Side in the restaurant business and the communities that they were commuting all day and night to work to. And in that space, I got very close to the idea that something could be done different. And at the time, I was in a relationship with someone whose family had been in real estate in a pretty significant way, but not in any transformational. So it was basically some of the problems that we have today in LA where there's empty properties and these things. You have a lot of absentee ownership. And for me, there was a moment in time when I said, there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of properties that are just simply abandoned. Let me see if I can bring together the 2 or 3 friends that I've made. All of them were from a diverse background. And give it a run. Give it a run based upon buying a small property, cleaning it up, getting rid of broken windows, painting, damaged buildings, trying to fix it up, and seeing how the community responds to that. And you may recall in the late 80s, there was a pretty tough environment socially in the inner city, in South LA, in East LA, and in Pico Union particularly. We were having a pretty significant, basically domination by the gangs.
Really? Okay.
It was a very tough area to work in. And it also happened to be at a time when Gloria Molina was running for her council seat, District 1. She was going to be the first Latino elected woman in the council. And I worked with her in her campaign. I was just making calls and kind of visiting. And she was running for District 1, which was that area. So that's where we sort of first put our dollars in.
Yeah. What was your first project? You must remember your first deal.
Yeah, so we worked on a project at Pico and Normandy. Very, very small. It was, I think we put in about $360,000 total together. It was a brick building, one of these buildings that needed reinforcement. And the idea was to basically take what at that point for that community was too big of a space because local, businesses weren't going to afford bigger spaces. They also wanted to work them themselves, so hiring staff was not needed. So we cut it into 4 different stores, little shops, and then in there we started renting to local businesses. And it was, fixing a window and painting it was literally like you were transforming them. Somebody's putting a penny in here, something's calling attention.
So a little bit of effort made a big difference. Yeah. So as you've grown this company, I saw a great article that featured you in Hispanic Executive, and you stated often companies, developers approach underserved communities in the way that, quote, "We have come here to save you or bring you something special. Be thankful for it." We don't think of it that way at all. We approach it as we have the privilege to make real change in a positive way, and we want to understand your history and what you think is possible. So with that, give us a sense of how you and your team have approached your work as you've evolved this work now across 4 states, 1 million square feet of space, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. What brings me back to that is we started the Primestor brand on the dark shadows of the 92 civil unrest. And it felt just before that, working with my partner, that any little spark was going to be enough to blow up the whole thing. And needless to say that the Rodney King incident was not a little spark.
Right.
So when you start thinking about people asking the question, well, I don't understand, why are people burning, quote unquote, their own neighborhood? And the urgency to get involved and try to figure that out led us to understand that this wasn't their neighborhood. It was a neighborhood where maybe it was designed to have them there, have our communities in certain areas by design, by isolation, and that nobody had really sat down and said, what is your community? What would you want in your community? What about that community makes you proud? What about that community brings trauma? And that really changed. That's when my partner, Leandro, and I started joining forces, because we built our first ground-up project. We thought, oh, my God, this is big time now. It was 6,000 square feet.
And when was that, and where was that project?
That was, the building burnt down that night over the last few days. And then it took us probably a year and a half or 2 to do a Health Start building for LA County at 69th and Western.
Okay.
And we thought we were big time because, we were building a building from the ground up.
Sure.
Which for us was a huge deal. But again, it was understanding what the community was missing and the voice that they had about what they wanted to see that created a model for us, which even at that moment, it started focusing around local hiring. And so I think our model has evolved only in that we have become better listeners. We've become better at asking more difficult questions, at putting ourselves in situations where we may be opening a Pandora's box about what the community wants and sees that we may or may not be able to deliver.
Sure.
And then figuring it out.
Yeah. But, your organization, you undertake a number of public-private partnerships. So, again, you're working closely with the community and listening. But you also, from my research, suggests that you work closely with a number of cities and municipal leaders at the local level, including those across Southeast Los Angeles. And I mentioned Southeast LA in particular because we had just a wonderful conversation way back, a year or so ago, episode 46, with Andy Carrasco and Emma Hernandez of Southeast Community Development Corporation. And from then, we had a conversation with Southgate Councilmember Denise Diaz in episode 58. So we really appreciated getting to learn about the issues and challenges and opportunities there and expose these dynamic new leaders coming out of that region. So share with us your work across those particular communities, because, again, I think a lot of times, what we hear about Southeast LA is, the environmental justice issues, the 710 freeway, issues, et cetera. But you've successfully worked in these diverse communities along that region. So share with us some thoughts on your work with these local leaders in those particular communities.
Yeah, I would say since the mid-'90s to now, we've had some incredible leadership in that region that comes from the community, and that's the greatest thing of all. I think that there's this sort of wave of youth in the last couple decades where they know their communities well, and they also understand the barriers to create change. And they think outside the box. And so for me, I realized quickly that the lack of infrastructure in these areas is one of the biggest barriers.
Mm-hmm.
And without significant infrastructure investment, we were never going to be able to create transformational projects.
Mm-hmm.
So that generated the requirement, really, up to this day, to have a partnership with municipalities and government in where there simply needs to be a bigger investment, right? You're almost starting from scratch, or in many cases, as you touched on environmental justice, you're starting below zero. And they have worked with us for decades in different programs, federal money, county money, state money, city money, but also in the outreach process, in really connecting and bringing people from the community that represent the majority of the voice and open themselves up to an exchange of ideas to create a project that they ultimately, we feel, that if we're successful, the project belongs to the community, and we're simply there to maintain it, operate it, and respond to their needs.
And how has community responded to the projects that you've done? I know you've been in Linwood and a couple other jurisdictions.
Yeah, no, we've been in Linwood, we've been in Southgate, we've been in Bell, we've been in Downey, we've been, Huntington Park, South LA, East LA, the Northeast San Fernando Valley, where we had Plaza Pacoima was a transformational project because it was massively contaminated from an old chroming facility for Price Pfister. I would say that community is, rightly so, skeptical and fearful at first. And I think it makes perfect sense. A lot of us come from places in history where institutions and government are not things you trust.
Not your friend,
Right. And so that initial barrier is not easy to overcome. And so I think that the way that we have really become better is by listening and by then conveying images, concepts, ideas to say, did we get this right? Are we in the right path? And you let us know. And I think Pacoima is a great example because I had in my mind, and I didn't share it with the community, this idea for this project, multi-level, and we were going to have a theater and a Target store and whatever. But on the heels of having shut down the plant when Black & Decker bought it, moving it to Mexico, firing 1,000 people with high-paying wages, leaving a contaminated site, the community said, you know what, all we really want is jobs. And we want living wage jobs. And that shaped the project we ended up building. Totally different than anything I had in mind.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I know you've spoken a lot about infill development, and I know infill development is a big subject, particularly in our urban areas as we think about climate change and mobility and people, the commutes that people have. We're trying to build more of this concept around the 15-minute city where you have more walkability, more livability, et cetera. But you've spoken about the need for more infill development and transit-oriented communities and how this has been absent in some of our Latino communities. So share your perspectives on how Primestor is overcoming those obstacles to getting more infill development in some of these communities.
Well, certainly we have metro building all over, and I think that's an amazing thing. We are not in favor of and do not touch greenfields. From our perspective, properties out in the boonies where you've got land, which should be kept as land as part of the global climate change crisis that we've got.
So you're not doing work out in San Bernardino County.
Exactly, yeah. Where you're figuring out, what do I do with the trees? From our perspective, we're very sensitive to that. I think the rezoning of LA County and the rezoning of the city of LA, and I was on the Development Advisory Council for many, many years under Antonio Villaraigosa. We were discussing how do we make zoning an integral part of the future of the region, and being able to do mixed use and address the needs of a growing community, a community that is very proud of its neighborhood but always finds itself in a place of, if I want to have a commensurate lifestyle, I have to leave. I have to move out. That doesn't create community. It doesn't create stability. One of the great things about California is that it's a small business state that is incredibly powerful, and the more diverse it is in every way, the stronger it is. So we have been able to engage the community directly, leadership, stakeholders, long-term residents, in the dialogue about density as a positive thing. And it takes a lot of effort to get projects like Vermont Manchester done, where you have a plaza, you've got retail, you've got housing, you've got a boarding school, you've got all this in one place. It takes a lot of patience from the community as well to open themselves up to the dialogue. I think that the region is doing things right. I think with Metro, with investing in these things, and I do think we're on the right path. But it's going to come, obviously at a huge investment, and a lot of rethinking about what we think of neighborhood. You want everything to be walking distance from your home, and I think that's the right way.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about capital, because I'm thinking back to an episode that we had a few episodes ago entitled "Women Building Community," where we had two diverse women who were developers, and then very few female developers out there. Alushim Getachew, formerly at CRA, and CRA, and Casey Keys, formerly of J.H. Sneider. And one of the things we talked about was for particularly women, minority-owned development firms, is the issue of capital and resources to carry out that work. And we were focusing on all the announcements made in the summer of 2020, various commitments made by Citibank, J.P. Morgan Chase, to get money to developers of color, to develop in communities of color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on those initiatives, and what's been your experience as Primestor Development in terms of accessing those resources or accessing the capital that you need to do the work that you're doing in these communities?
Capital is probably our worst problem. I think that capital still does very little for our communities and for diverse developers. The standards that are used, the structures that are created out there still use mainstream language, still have a model that somehow always puts us in a slightly off the approval list because, you're missing something, or I don't know, the economy may be changing and therefore we are going to, I love the expression, flight to quality.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Very loaded.
Yeah, exactly. Incredibly loaded. And so the phrase of, those quote unquote communities, right? And so I think that we all need to sort of work together to continue to deliver great projects with great outcomes to push those boundaries. I do think that a lot of people took the summer of 2020 as an opportunity to market this issue, but not really deliver.
Right.
I think a lot of it was capital that when you really got into it, it was almost like a hard money loan. And anybody sophisticated like Casey would say, wait a minute, this is not exactly helping me in any way.
Right.
In fact, it's putting me at a situation where I'm going to regret it. And even in that case, the amount of capital has been very small. And this is where the biggest opportunity is. So the capital should be even more than in the other markets.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that was the perspective shared by those two guests as well. And I know, again, these conversations are ongoing. And recently, I saw there was an announcement from the White House, really just a few months ago, July 28, talking about this coalition that's going to try to align resources and investment, and particularly federal resources, into these communities. I don't know if you saw that, or if you think that there is value for South LA and Southeast LA in these initiatives.
I'm hopeful. You may remember back in the foundation of the new market tax credits when it was first introduced.
Yes.
I believe it was Bill Clinton that announced his West Coast announcement happened in Watts.
Right.
We have this great new program, new market tax credits. The new market tax credit program was not used in Watts until a couple of years ago, I think 3 years ago, when we redeveloped Jordan Downs. I mean, think about the significance of that. The project, the capital was created for these kinds of opportunities. And it took that long to put some small amount of it to work in one of the most significant communities in South LA. So I do think that these programs have great ideas. The problem is how they're staffed, the language that goes into them. New market tax credits is a great tool once you know how to use it. To get to learn to use it takes incredible amount of staff time, dedication. It's very complex. And so I don't think it's again setting these barriers and these obstacles that aren't really helping you get from an entrepreneur or a great idea to at least some moderate level of success that then you can go from there.
So given that you raised the issue of the new markets tax credits, what is your thought on the opportunity zones that were, initiative that was launched a couple of years ago? How has that evolved, and has that been beneficial to South LA or Southeast LA?
Beneficial, I would imagine, in a very small way. I think it was put together too quickly. Not a great piece of real estate doesn't become a good piece of real estate just because you give it some tax incentive.
Right.
And we've looked at opportunity zones only as, here's a good site, here's a good potential opportunity to do something. Oh, it happens to be in an opportunity zone. I can tell you from being basically dedicated only to these kinds of communities and these environments, we have yet to find one.
Right, okay.
So that in a way speaks a lot about how I think that was sort of put together.
Yeah.
I think the idea is great. I think the execution needs to be revisited.
Yeah. So here in LA, you touched on it. You talked about Manchester, Vermont Manchester site down in South Los Angeles, which has such a storied history, and I remember it well from my time serving on the redevelopment agency under former Mayor Vito Vergosa. And here we are in 2022, and I think 2021 we finally got some movement, some positive movement on that site. So I know you're involved with it. So share for our audience here and all over the story of this particular site and your involvement in this work going forward.
Yeah, it's a storied site. I mean, it was burnt down in the civil unrest of '92.
'92, yeah.
Amazing to think that a corner of that importance would sit there that long.
How big is how many acres?
I think it's about 7 or 8 acres. Yeah. It spans over 2 blocks. And there's a street being vacated in the middle to accommodate the project. So Metro has taken an incredible leadership. Holly Mitchell, incredible leadership. I think thanks to them, the project has come to reality. There's a boarding school there under Seed. There is a store that will have underground parking.
Has Target committed to the site?
Target has only committed and announced.
Okay.
That is a deal. Metro is putting their training facility above Target there, so you'll have a local job training and information center, as well as a few hundred units of affordable housing and permanent supportive housing, and a plaza area. We're looking forward to having a locally operated and owned coffee place right at the plaza where the transportation center will happen. And I think it's a project that could have, should have, would have happened. Maybe not with Target 20 years ago, 15 years ago for sure. Target obviously has been a huge commitment after the George Floyd murder, and so therefore we've got that benefit of them awakening to the opportunity. They've done an incredible job, but I would say there's a lot of parcels in the city, in the region, that are empty. Partly for the same reason that this one is, which is some private ownership gets a hold of a property. They want to profit from it beyond the reality of what the potential is. They may just be speculators. They're not from the community. They don't really have a vision for doing well and doing good at the same time. And I think that is very common. And then, of course, we touched a little bit on the infrastructure issue. So when you get to a place where the infrastructure investment may be greater than the land value, you need the vision, the leadership of the government agencies, the city leaders, the county leaders to take that initiative. So I think that's the story of Vermont Manchester.
And what is Primestore's role on the retail end of it? And I'm curious to ask that because certainly, I know under former Councilmember Jan Perry, covering Council District 9, she was a big advocate in trying to get more sit-down restaurants, for example. It's a lot of fast food, and everybody wants a Trader Joe's in their community. Everybody wants a Target in their community, and of course these folks are looking at the numbers, and they're all suggesting that there's not enough spend. But those people do go out of those communities to spend money. So what is your role in this project from a retail development perspective, and what are the types of retailers that are coming into this site?
So our role, we're building the entire project with the exception of the school.
Okay.
So we're building the housing, we're building the retail, we're building the plaza, we're building the metro offices. Bridge Housing is our partner on the housing, ultimately owning the housing and operating it. But we're constructing the whole thing, and a parking structure, a pretty big parking structure. I would say one of the biggest contributions that our firm has done, and the team that we have is pretty exceptional, is that we have demonstrated for the last 3 decades the power of the consumer to retailers that have historically not wanted or had an interest to come to our communities. And we've built a lot of credibility with these companies that when we identify a site as a potential for them to be successful there, it has a lot of value to them. Okay. That if Primestore is behind it, one, we're going to get full community buy-in. The community's already going to be at the table looking forward to it. We are a tenant, fill in the blank. We are the tenant that the community asks for, because Primestore doesn't build projects for anchors that aren't requested by the community. So they have a welcome. Okay. And also, they vetted the site for high potential of sales and delivering quality projects. So you want your brand up there to be, somewhat relevant to your brand positioning. That's, I think, been our biggest role.
And do you all take on a lot of that economic analysis of the community yourselves, or
yes?
How does that work? Because I know, for example, in the work that has been done to revitalize downtown LA, you had an organization called the Downtown Center Business Improvement District that did a lot of research and analysis, and they did a lot of the marketing for that community. And South LA, unfortunately, has not had sort of the strongest sort of business organization or chamber network, shall we say?
Yeah, I think that they may not have the sort of podium that maybe downtown LA has had, but there's some great organizations out there. In this particular project, Coco was very involved, and I think they bring a lot of wisdom. But in the retail perspective of things, we do all that in-house. Okay. And we go through a very unique process of sizing and explaining to potential tenants and users just the size of the opportunity. We do 100% of our own leasing. Our own outreach, our own marketing, our own branding. Okay. And so we try to keep all that cohesive so that the message is consistent.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, you talked about, obviously, this storied site of Vermont Manchester that's been vacant since 1992. And I'm reminded of an article that we came across in Curbed LA from 6 years ago, so 2015, which speaks about the large number of vacant lots around the city of Los Angeles and a high number of lots in South LA in particular, which Vermont Manchester is one of those. I think I shared with you, I was at an event for the National Association of Minority Architects Southern California chapter this past weekend down in Leimert Park, and I was chatting with a woman who's moved back to the community in her family's old home in Leimert Park, and I asked her, what changes has she noticed? And she said, I just see a lot of vacant lots that were here 40 years ago. So what's with this issue of all these vacant lots, and how do we go about stimulating economic activity and getting job-producing activity in these neighborhoods?
Yeah, a tremendous amount of opportunity is the way we look at it. I would say that part of this has come from the changing landscape of the region. If you think about zoning and you think about globalization, how many enterprises and businesses have left the region or the country as a result of work and jobs, similar to what happened to Detroit, right? Moving elsewhere. We've worked on a lot of sites that used to be industrial or had some sort of an operation that was semi-industrial, semi-warehousing, where that eventually moved to Asia or wherever other country it moved to. And it happens to be, of course, in the communities that we work in because they were putting housing and projects next to industrial sites and environmental justice aside. Those then became vacant. That's part of it. I think the other part about it is that simply capital hasn't been paying attention. A great example of this was the Amaron site that we redeveloped into the Azalea Shopping Center in Southgate, intersection of Firestone and Atlantic, which on any book, on any map, in any country in the world, you pull that intersection up. You look at the demos, you look at the size of the parcel, and all it says to you is amazing location. Well, that facility sat for decades as simply a site where they buried pipes for years so that they could issue warranties on the pipes. How many years does a pipe last underground? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
Wow.
And that was its purpose. 34 acres at a main and main intersection. Why? Because you could do it in Southgate. You're not going to do it in Brentwood. Right? And so we took on, and I think there's a lot of that, coupled with what we touched about earlier, which is that there's absentee ownership that's speculative. Zoning was industrial, and you want to do housing, you want to do retail, you've got contaminated sites, you've got these kinds of issues. I think it all has really been a confluence of factors. And as we become a wiser, I think more awakened society, particularly in our region, led by diversity, we don't stand for those things anymore, and we shouldn't.
On that point, how do you think the city is doing in terms of looking at its community plans and the whole rezone LA process, and particularly looking at some of these communities in South LA, and I think specifically to Council District 9. And I was always amazed when I worked for the LA Economic Development Corporation covering South LA and going down Goodyear Tract area, and you see like homes, factory homes, like who allows this? How did this even happen?
Transition is hard, In our projects today, the biggest challenge is parking. It's the one thing that costs a ton of money, produces no revenue, and is in a imbalance to the realities of the marketplace. So planners come out of education coming out and saying parking, we don't need any parking. It should be zero. And of course, businesses, homeowners are saying, no, we need parking today, and we need a lot of it. And Metro's saying no parking. So I think they're both right. And transition is the same when you think about housing and industrial. And so we're in that world of transition in these communities. And I think the community plans and planning have a very difficult job of looking at things long term, but satisfying the development needs of today. And I do think they're on the right track where we're headed. However, technology moves so incredibly fast. A few years ago, you would have said, Uber, Lyft, they're going to be temporary. I think that kind of a model is here to stay. Driverless cars, the last mile being solved, bike riding, scooters, all these things are solving for that. But in the interim, you got to spend a fortune on parking. And so convertibility of those buildings is important.
I'm good with the Uber and Lyft. I'm not down with the scooters myself.
I agree with you. Quite dangerous.
So you talked about certainly the work that planning is doing and the evolution of our communities. So as you survey the landscape of our region, what geographies are you most excited about, and what types of projects are you looking forward to working on over the next 5-10 years for Primestor?
Well, South LA, south of the 10, down to Long Beach, and the Northeast San Fernando Valley, I think, have incredible opportunity. East Los Angeles continues to have incredible opportunity. But you think about communities like Compton and Linwood and Carson. You think about Pacoima and Arleta, Panorama City, just gargantuan opportunities for underutilized parcels, for we've got areas in those areas that have no sidewalks.
Right.
And so I do think that is where the growth of the population and the density and the future of infrastructure that's already committed to and or coming soon is a fertile ground for development.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly, I think organizationally, you started in 1992, but I read that you've been looking at evolving your own organization in new and exciting ways, and that you're looking at an employee ownership model. So what's the latest for Primestor? How are you looking to position the company? Not that you're looking to leave anytime soon, I don't think, but how are you looking to position your company for the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so we started in the program of educating the team holistically into employee ownership pre-COVID. The COVID period was incredibly challenging for us, and we kind of put everything on pause just to figure out what the world was going to leave us with. Of course, we all went through it. You didn't know what was going to happen next week.
Right.
But we are now re-embarking on that process. So for us, the greatest representation of what we stand for, which is activists operating as developers, is to have our team own the business and carry it forward in a legacy strategy to other communities and other cities around the country where there's real ownership by the folks. And we have an incredible team that has been with us for a very long time and continues to grow. And it's a team fully comprised of people that are from the community, that have a great passion for the community, have a zero learning curve about what the issues are, and have great ideas on how to address them. So our plan is to continue the training of what it means to go from being someone on the team to then making decision as an owner, because it's a very different dynamic.
Absolutely.
And it would be sort of unfair to give stock options that have no power. At the same time, it would be unfair to give power of stock options with no training.
Right. No, that's outstanding. We look forward to the evolution of that. Arturo, this has been great. And as we like to say on Civitas LA, the guest gets the final word. So any concluding thoughts or calls to action?
I think many years ago on a panel, that was a pretty confrontational conversation. One of the people in the audience said, well, it sounds to me like just because you speak Spanish and you come from Mexico and that's your competitive advantage, if we don't have that, then how are we going to be able to play in that space? You're telling us there's great opportunity there. How do we as a community then get involved if we don't have that? And what is sort of the secret to your business? Sort of the classic question, what's the secret sauce, right?
Right.
I think that as an industry, as a community, as an organization, our secret sauce is humility. And I think we need a lot more of that everywhere. That's what I think we need to sort of broadly disseminate, is that in humility comes learning and curiosity, and that's what we hope to stand for now and in the future.
Arturo, that is excellent. Great closing thoughts on that. We certainly appreciate your time today, and we certainly wish you and your team every continued success, and we look forward to coming out and seeing the Vermont Manchester project as it takes form, and we hope to be there for the grand opening, and we'll go shopping at Target. You've got your Civitas LA tote bag, so make sure you have your Civitas LA tote bag when you go shopping at Target, and take a selfie for us.
Thank you, Dwayne. Appreciate that.
No, and as this episode is our concluding episode for this year's Hispanic Heritage Month series, we're so excited again to have had Leticia Reed Buckley, CEO of La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, on our show, followed by Community Spotlight Boyle Heights with community leaders Josefina Lopez of Casa 0101 Theater and attorney Alfred Fryho Jr., and now this great conversation with Arturo Sneider of Primestor Development, Inc. We can't do this without listeners, first of all, but also sponsors. So I want to give a special thank you to our friends at Vermont Slauson Economic Development Corporation and Arts for LA for their interest in our work and their support of this series. To learn more about the great work of Vermont Slauson, please go to vsedc.org. And as always, to our audience, here and abroad and everywhere in between, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we hope you'll join us in 2 weeks as we look forward to our next great civic conversation. And as we always say on CivitasLA, until we meet again, stay strong and get involved. To learn more about Civitas LA and share feedback on this program, or if you have a recommendation about future programs, please visit our website at www.civitasla.com. And connect with us on Facebook at CivitasLA, Instagram at Civitas_LA, and Twitter at Civitas_LA.